The meeting is being recorded.
Good.
Oh, and there they are.
Yes.
Who do I see?
Hey, everybody at home, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just fine. Yes.
Terrific, terrific. Now that I know that, I am going to mute you all.
Okay.
Aha.
It's not personal. All right. Give me another moment at home, folks, to get myself organized, and we'll get started here.
We know a lot of those kids, and yeah, I don't know why I.
All right, everyone. I just need a moment to take a breath. Join me if you care to. You can keep breathing too. All right, on the count of three, ready? Okay, Tamara says we should all say our names. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Jay. Good? Oh, okay, that wasn't what she wanted. Thank you. I'm going to put the people who are up on the screen also kind of with us. Lost my cursor. There it is. And let me change the camera so that they're seeing you. Okay. So now they're kind of seeing you, and everyone at home can wave. Hi, Mom. Hey, Dad. All right. So let's make it kind of quick, because I got a lot of ground to cover, and you can wave up at the camera and around the room as you tell us who you are.
Everett Shaw.
Connie Elkinson.
Barbara Finiguera.
Shell Green.
Michelle Porras.
Lee Bobier.
Mark Friedman.
Tamara Lichman.
Scott Lichman.
Karen Rosenbaum.
Glenn Wolfe.
Diane Rossler.
Alan Youngstein.
Joan Madison.
Aaron Lear.
All right, let's start on the screen. I guess it's kind of hard for you to know which ones I want to go next, but so I'll do it. Up here, see, hi guys, I'm right here. Up here, we got Marty and Andrea Levine. Peter Epstein's here. Barbara and, oh my God. This is embarrassing. Hold on. Oh, all right. Mr. Gutman, I'm forgetting your first name. Yeah. Barbara, can you unmute us? while she's doing that, Alberto's here. He's a brand new member, maybe our newest member.
Alberto Becasius. Nice to meet you.
Here's Ruth Rothside.
Yeah.
Carolyn. Go ahead, Barbara.
And Ed.
Of course it's Ed.
Gutman.
I know that. Of course it's Ed. God. Sorry, Ed. Embarrassing. Carolyn Ginsberg, my parents, Gail and Stu Rabin, Sarah Konigsberg, and here are the Hellers, Bruce and Leanne. And then there are other folks who I know intended to be with us and will be with us in future sessions, and we'll introduce them next time. I was just saying to the meeting I was in a few moments ago that I realize I'm in an uncomfortable part of my career as I now see that when someone wants to meet with me, I'm scheduling 2 to 3 weeks out, which has never been the reality before. And I, always, if someone wanted to hang out, tomorrow, next day, but that's no longer my reality. And I'm late to everything, which for those of you who know me, know that really gets under my skin. Oh.
So for those of you who scheduled, those of us who scheduled something 2 to 3 weeks ago
You're still on.
for this Monday.
Uh-huh. I'm looking forward to it.
So we're meeting at 3:15, right?
I'm not even going to check. Anyway, I'm really excited about this journey we're going to take. Initially, it's planned for 4 sessions. The first session I wasn't able to be here for, and I apologize for that. And so I'm going to continue jumping in as if it's 4 sessions, but the 4th Thursday, what would be the 4th? I think it's the 19th of December. I have a wedding. And so I can't be here that night. And then we get right around into the holiday season, and then we get into January, and I'm on sabbatical in January, so maybe we have our 4th session into February. I don't know. We'll see where we land, but I'm going to keep going as if. All right. So the first session is what I'm calling early history, pre-state. And there's an important reason that I want to make sure we spend a little time on this as we get into the basic knowledge of Israel. And that is because we're not I say we, and that's an important thing to note as well. We're not a recent innovation. We didn't come out of nowhere. And when we get into debates and play games with others about who was there first, who has claims to the Holy Land, whose is it really, who does God prefer, these games never emerge with convincing the other that you're right. And so I don't share this material with you to help you win arguments. In fact, I don't imagine that anything we talk about is going to help you win arguments. But the goal of this journey that we're going to start is to help you feel like pieces of education or familiarity or comfort when it comes to Israel are yours when we're done. And you may not feel as often any longer like you hear conversations about Israel and you're thinking, I should probably know that. And it makes it hard to respond to criticism. So the beginning is historical. This class is going to be about leading up to 1948. Next class, we're going to look at what realities have changed over the course of the 75 years that Israel has been a modern, recognized state. And that will bring us up to the modern moment. The third session and the fourth session, I don't know exactly how they'll be broken apart, but that's going to take us into what in Hebrew is known as the matzav. Matzav simply means situation. So if someone asks, what's the matzav? They're asking you, tell me about the current circumstances. And when we talk about the conflict, the complexities of it all, the local government, all of this, it's all part of the matzav. And so the first 2 sessions are intended to fill in those blanks, to get you there so that the matzav makes more sense. After living there for about 3.5 years, I left with one clarity. And that is that I was just beginning to get a sense of what I didn't understand about Israel. It's an incredibly complex society. And it's my hope that what we're going to be looking at in the next 2 sessions is going to help give you the basis to understand just how complex it is and why it has been elusive to arrive at any sort of final status that's going to lead to a peaceful era in the region. I did indicate, for those who saw my email, that this series is not intended as a much of a discussion, certainly not the first 2 sessions about the opinions on this or that cultural attitude or that governmental choice. We may have space for that, and maybe it'll end up being that the 4th session is us coming back together after having looked at the material and then having the chance to weigh in, to wrestle with some of the finer points. So while I may not be encouraging the debate or the energy, what I do encourage are the questions. It is so easy for a facilitator to assume something that is not yours, some knowledge, and it's only possible to address that if you raise your hand and say, wait a second, can you clarify this? Or I heard about that, or how does this fit in? And it is almost always the case that if you have a question, the person over your shoulder and a row back has the same question. And so you will model great bravery and receive great gratitude for others if you will ask those questions that you have. Anybody have any starting questions before I start to get into the material? And let me also ask this question alongside that. Are there elements that you expect to learn and you would walk away disappointed if we did not spend time on? So if you need to know more about the invasion into Lebanon in 1981, or you need to understand more about the difference between Israeli Arabs and the Arabs in the West Bank and the Arabs if there are elements that you need to know to feel like this was a success, this is one opportunity to make sure that I know that. Lee.
We hear, there's Jews and there's Arab and there's Muslims, but there's also Christians. We don't hear much about Christians. So, as a Jew by choice, whose family is or was or is periodically quite religious in their Christian faith, and has visited Israel, I'd be curious to know where Christians fit into the Matzah and anything else.
That's great. That's great. Lee was asking, people at home won't be able to hear you if you're not speaking into the microphone. That's why I passed it around before. So if I repeat what you're saying, it's so that they can hear it. Lee was... Oh, yes, thank you. They're staring at all of you. That's funny. Thank you. Lee was hopeful that we would spend some time clarifying where the Christians are in the Matzav. Yeah.
As a Gentile, if the name itself, Israel and Israelite, has significance, why was it chosen as a name for the country?
That's a wonderful question. Did everyone at home hear that? Good, okay. Why the name Israel? Good. And actually, it wasn't exactly where I was going to start, but it's pretty close. So I will now make sure that goes in there. Yeah, Karen.
So I guess also coming out of reading another book, I want to understand a little bit more about what happened with the displacement of Arabs, which I think they call the catastrophe, in terms of, from their ancestral homes, and how did that all shake out, the Arab rebellion,
Okay.
and the founding of Israel.
Great. Karen wants to know more about the what we call the War of Independence and what the Arabs call Nakba, the catastrophe. The catastrophe doesn't focus so much on the displacement, which is what you specifically started with, the population transfer that did happen as the war turned in our tide. That's a piece of the Nakba, but Nakba is the war of independence from their point of view. And to learn a little bit more about how did that take shape and what does it mean? And, law of return kind of comes into that conversation. I'm looking at home to see if anyone at home has their hand up. Yeah, Ruth, what would you like to make sure we talk about?
Couple questions that I've always had on my mind. So for years growing up, we heard, or at least I heard, that in 1948, Ben Gurion said, we'll have two separate states, we'll live together, we'll live in peace, etc. And then everybody descended upon Israel, which I know happened. But then there were times when, if you read Ari Shavit's book, that things, Israel wasn't so great. And what I'd love to know is when some of the people stayed, and some of the Palestinians stayed, and some people left because the other country said, leave, and we're going to destroy Israel, and you'll be able to go back. So I don't know, is there any figure that anybody has on, how many people were forced out, how many Palestinians were killed when Israel went into certain cities and destroyed them? So that's one question. And the other one is, what was the situation with Gaza on October 6th, and how much power, or did Israel have any power over Gaza at that point?
Wow, that's fabulous. Okay, I'm taking some notes. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, good, thank you. Sheldon.
When speaking about the West Bank, which is a term we commonly use, how is that territory related to the other Jewish kingdom, the kingdom of Judea?
Okay, so Sheldon wants to understand the relationship between what's today called the West Bank, and I would add on not just Judea, but also Samaria. So those two regions. Okay. This is perfect. And I'm just looking one more time at home to see if anyone's got their hand up. Oh, shoot. Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
In Shavit's book, when he talks about the Jews not noticing the people who were there on the land, were they the people working the land, or were they the Arabs who owned the land?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll need to go back and take a quick look. It's been a while since I've read that book, but I'll try to understand and get back to you about what it was he was referring to, but then we'll talk about a fair bit next session, maybe a little bit this session, the relationship between the Jews who were making Aliyah in waves and the people that were there when they got there. Okay. Whew, that was fabulous. And I'm really proud of you for being able to articulate the gaps in your knowledge, in your comfort zone, in your collection of expertise. That's actually not always very easy for people to do. So we're going to start with some definitions. Actually, I should probably make one caveat before that, and that is to remind you that in all topics, literally every single topic, but especially on something like the Middle East, there's no such thing as a presentation without bias. And so I think the best we can do is to admit and to acknowledge and to notice our bias and to name it when it's happening. And I will certainly do that when we get into topics that need to be named as from my point of view. And I'll share a couple of resources as we go that are a little bit more explicit about their bias. But Karen kind of introduced us just to simply the terminology. What's the difference between the Milchemet HaAtzmaut and the Nakba? Those are the same things, and yet the bias has everything to do with what it means to you. So there will be bias woven throughout everything I say. There always is, but I own it. Fair? Okay, so let's start with some definitions. So there are three expressions that are used to point to that place. One is Eretz Yisrael. The second is Medinat Yisrael. And the third is Am Yisrael. And they all are obviously built around that name Yisrael, Israel. So let me answer your question real quickly. When in the Bible, Jacob goes off running from his brother Esau, he crosses into new territory, he lays down that night, and he has a dream. No, I'm sorry, I have it backwards. On the way back to the territory, reconnecting with Esau, he has a different kind of evening encounter with an angel. It's a very mysterious story. He wrestles with the angel all night long. And as the sun rises, the angel says, "You've got to let me go. You have to. I can't stay here any longer." And Jacob says, "I'm not going to let you go until you give me a blessing." And the angel's blessing is, "Your name shall no longer be Yaakov, but Yisrael," which means you wrestle with God. And he says, "Your name is Yisrael, for you have wrestled with God and with man and prevailed." So from that point on, his name is Yisrael. He goes on to have 13 kids, although we only ever talk about 12 of them. 10 plus 2 grandkids. And those sons all become the heads of tribes. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. Literally, the sons of this man whose name is now Israel create a massive growth of people, and that is the Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Flash forward 3,500 years or so, and David Ben-Gurion and his team are trying to figure out, what should we call this place? And they decide to utilize biblical references because they're seeking to rebirth something which is clearly part of the Torah. And so they say, this is the land where Yisrael was and now is again. And so they decide on the name Yisrael. But then I want to just differentiate between two more concepts. One is Medinat Yisrael, and the other is Eretz Yisrael. Eretz is the rocks. Eretz means land, the land of Israel. Eretz is within the boundaries. It's a reference to the physicality of the place. Medina is a state. We live in Medinat, Connecticut, the state of Connecticut. Medinat Yisrael is the state of Israel. It's the modern governmental entity that takes a place, the political piece, basically, yeah. It's the national body that participates on the world scene like all the other countries in the world. So people will sometimes talk about their commitment to Medinat Yisrael or their commitment to Eretz Yisrael. And people who have a commitment to Medinat Yisrael would not be so deeply offended at the suggestion that maybe Israel could have taken shape in Uganda, or maybe we could have gone up to Alaska and that could have been the Jewish state, because they're not focused as much on the rocks. But now we're going to get into the next set of definitions, which has to do with the word Zionism. Because Zionism comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and it's important to be able to differentiate between them. So first of all, the word Zionism was first, in a modern way, presented or developed by Nathan Birnbaum in a book called Auto-Emancipation. And he defined it this way. This was in 1890, by the way. The national movement for the return of the Jewish people to their homeland and the resumption of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So even before Ben-Gurion pronounced the name Medinat Yisrael, he's talking about Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. So his definition of Zionism has to do with the fulfillment of prophecy. And that's going to help us as we now move into the next two types of Zionism. One of them, actually I have four types of Zionism, but the two are most important for us to understand. One is what I'll call political Zionism, and the other is religious Zionism. Now, the story in our Torah goes basically like this. I'm going to give you rules. You're going to screw it up. I'm going to punish you. Eventually, I'm going to forgive you. We'll make things great again, and then you're going to screw up again. And that cycle more or less plays out over and over and over throughout all of Tanakh. That is our pattern. And God seems to know it's coming and ruin the ending with a spoiler. But part of the prophecy is that each time we've been thrown out at God's choice, now, it doesn't matter if you believe this, I don't believe this, but this is how the narrative goes. God's going to toss you out of the land of Israel because you didn't deserve it. You weren't ready for it. You didn't earn it. But at some point, God will bring you back. And that point is going to be connected to the notion of Messiah. Messiah is a really complicated, slippery term that can have all kinds of implications for erratic or extremist behaviors. But basically, the idea is this. The world was created imperfect, and at some point it will be perfected. The arrival of the Messiah will bring with it several prophecies that we share with Christians. They got it from us in the first place anyway. So the prophecies include the end of time, end of days. We won't count time anymore. It won't matter. There's no such thing as time. The end of all war, the rebirth of all people who've ever lived, kind of reincarnation, and finally, and most importantly for our conversation, the ingathering of the exiles. So Jews have been spread far and wide across the planet, but when Messiah comes, we will be gathered back to the promised land. Now, some of the traditions you might be familiar with are related to these prophecies. When you bury a Jew, traditionally, depending on the orientation of the cemetery, traditionally, you have her feet facing Jerusalem so that when we are reincarnated, we're already facing the right direction. We've got a head start. When you have a person who goes through an amputation, the tradition, when possible, is to take the amputated limb and to bury it in the plot that the rest of the person will eventually rejoin. Because when you get reincarnated, if they had to amputate your leg, that would suck. Resurrected, thank you. Yeah, resurrected is the right word. Thanks, Michelle. And then similarly, the epicenter of the resurrection is going to start at Jerusalem, right at the Holy Temple Mount. And it's going to go out in concentric circles. So the closer you are to that one point, the earlier you're going to be resurrected. And so the nearest cemetery to that spot is the Mount of Olives, right outside the old city walls. And right at the base of that mountain, which is the closest a Jew can get to being buried to the Temple Mount, those the cemetery plots cost millions of dollars. And people are buried, multiple deep, because you want to be as close as you can to that messianic moment. Now, a few of you may remember that a year ago, I gave a Yom Kippur sermon about French fries. And I spoke about how I am a Zionist because I believe that there is a perfect fry out there. And even though I know where the best fries I've ever had are, Layla's, I keep ordering fries. They are solid fries. I keep ordering fries elsewhere because I believe that there's something better. And I use that as a playful way to define one definition of Zionism. Zion is not a place of physicality. There is a Mount Zion right outside the old city of Jerusalem, but Zion is a euphemism for a perfected world. So when people imagine Zion, they're thinking about the time after Messiah comes. So when you assign the word Zionism to your support for a Jewish state, it's helpful to know what direction you're starting from. Hold on, Shell. If you see that a miraculous thing happened politically, geopolitically, post-Holocaust, although well before that, we already had come in the millions, that we rebirthed a modern state in the ancestral lands using the language of the Torah, reborn from, I mean, who does it? Who rebirths languages? That enough would be reason to say Zionism, clearly. This is the ingathering of the exiles. This is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Look at, it's happening. But if you come at it from a religious point of view, then there's an interesting twist. There are two kinds of religious Zionists. Those who believe that we're back in the land because God ordained it, not through the efforts or the machinations of humans, but this is what God wanted. And God, of course, in the Torah very explicitly gives us the lands of not just Judea and Samaria, but the land of the 12 tribes. And I'll show you maps at some point along the way soon. And those lands were given to us by God. You can't compromise on that. How can you say, God gave it to us, but I'll let you keep it? So a religious Zionist isn't going to have the ability to contemplate flexibility or compromise when it comes to a final status solution with the neighbors. There is a third kind of Zionism, which is what I'll call ultra-religious Zionism. And these folks are the ones who may already have lived in the land of Israel or who today live elsewhere. They're exclusively ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they are anti-Zionist because they do not believe that God has mandated this. They see it as a human decision where we rose up and took control prematurely, and they think we should not be there until God makes it explicitly clear. So the notion of Zionism is incredibly complex. I'm going to toss out two others that are, I don't know, I just came up with them, so I don't know that they're any more formal than that. But I'm going to call one of them cultural Zionism, and I'm going to include maybe myself in that. And that is the notion that I believe that our people needs a place. And culturally, I relate very deeply and powerfully to Israel. That's where we are. There are many other places that I relate to very powerfully as a Jew, but culturally, Israel is a piece of who I am. So that's cultural Zionism. I don't necessarily have an insistence on the political entity. I don't necessarily focus on the rocks, the borders. The fourth type, I'll say, and I called it a protectorate Zionism. And this would be maybe the folks who, and these are overlapping, the folks who say, the Jews just need some place to escape. Every time I've moved into a new house as an adult, I've looked around and I've wondered, which of these neighbors would hide me if it came to it, right? Israel is the global hiding place for the Jews. At least that's the way that it has positioned itself. The law, you may have heard batted around, is the law of return, or the right of return, plays out in two different ways. The first is that a Jew, no matter where he or she is in the world, can make immediate aliyah and become a citizen without question. The second type of law of return is much more complicated. It is the displaced Palestinian, whose house is in Jerusalem, the keys to which they still have, and they want to go home. And they want the law of return, the right of return to their home. And that's tough. That's a zero-sum game. Tamara?
Do the other people, not Jews, feel their claim to the land is also mandated or based in their religion?
So Tamara's question was, our sense of divine gift, of the religious commitment to that strip of land that I articulated and that we know is so close to our story, is that shared by the others who claim the land? My understanding is no. Islam has, just like us, a relationship to the notion of holy sites. There are places in the world that are more holy than others. And in their list of holy spots, Jerusalem is number 3. They've got Mecca, they've got Medina, and then they've got Jerusalem. They have not, as far as I know, in their doctrine, they've not been given Israel by God. Now, there was a joke I heard once that I'll do poor justice to. There was a debate between a pro-Zionist and a pro-Palestinian, and they were throwing facts back and forth and back and forth. And the families have been here for so long. And the Zionist says, back when Abraham was digging his wells, and the Palestinians were giving him so much ajda back then even. And the Palestinian jumps in and says, wait a second, there were no Palestinians back then. Aha! The game of trying to figure out who was there first is an unwinnable game, and it doesn't matter. Because emotionally, each group has a tie to the land that's deep. And so Palestinian families who look at that space, that land, and have been there for, I don't know, 800 years? I don't know what it is. Do they have more claim than we do when we were there for more time longer ago, but we left for a while? And it's a very complicated debate, and that's why we can't seem to win either side of. Michelle?
So a question then comes to be, if the Romans, when they conquered a city, buried it and built on top of it and renamed it, that this word Palestinian never existed until the Romans put it there, then who are these, quotation marks, Palestinians?
Mm-hmm.
Are they Phoenicians? Are they from Syria? You know.
Yeah. So Sheldon's wondering, repeating for them, Sheldon's wondering ethnically and culturally and historically, who are these Palestinians? You know, are they the derivatives of some ancient group that has always been there? Are they the expansion of people from the Arabian Peninsula who migrated west and eventually stopped there? Good questions. I'm not sure that I have an answer. That, by the way, that's going to be my response a lot. If you're going to keep asking really good questions, I'm going to be saying a lot. I don't know, I'll get back to you. I'm not going to get back to you. I just say that to get out of it. Michelle?
A question I think you will know the answer to. To sort of Lee's point about Christianity earlier, when you're defining the different potential Zionist groups,
Yep.
Where would you put, and maybe it's religious, but where do you put the sort of the Christians who want the Jews to be in Israel so that the Messiah can come for them?
Beautiful. Oh, at home, Michelle was just asking about this extra group, this next group, which are the Christian Zionists. And maybe if we're going to get really creative, we should acknowledge that there are, I'm going to call it democratic Zionists, not from the sense of the party, but from those who believe in the political system, who support the state of Israel because it is an island of democracy. So back to the Christian Zionists who send millions and millions of dollars to Israel every year. That's a loaded relationship because in order for their prophecy to be realized, some pretty awful things have to happen, and we will be the victims of those things. We're not going to benefit from the emergence of the Messiah, but they're trying to do what the anti-Zionists, the ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionists, are criticizing, which is to help build the Jewish state of Israel with all the Jews there, because once all the Jews are there, then the messianic prophecy can begin to take shape. And the rapture, the Armageddon. By the way, Armageddon is just probably a Greek smushing of two Hebrew words, which are Har Megiddo. Up north in Israel, in the Galilee, there's a mountain called Megiddo, Har Megiddo, Mount Megiddo. That's where the word Armageddon comes from, because that clash between Christ and the Antichrist is supposed to, I guess, happen there. But now I'm way outside my knowledge base. Let me pause and see if anyone at home is raising their hands that I can't see. All right, at home, everyone's got all of this nailed down. Yeah, Alan.
So hopefully this doesn't take the conversation too far away from where you want to take it. Is there anything that is relevant that sort of talks to why all kinds of upheavals with governments have happened before? The Turks went in and did whatever they did, where they did, and they got replaced by these other people. But there isn't any, from a worldview perspective, of, well, how come the group that got pushed out before, how come they're not coming back and looking to reclaim? It seems that that conversation happens.
Okay, so Alan is thinking about the unique nature of the Middle East, where empires have risen and fallen, and people have, although there are not very many examples of it, of peoples returning to their ancestral homeland, asking for it back. A comparison might be, well, some of the colonial experiences of the world where Britain moved in and took over, or France did, and then, through independence efforts or anti-colonialism efforts. By the way, I should be really clear. In my estimation and reading, Zionism is not colonialism. The Jews in Israel are not colonialists, and there are some important distinctions I'll make when we get there. But or the Native Americans saying, dude, you just took our land. We'd like it back, please. Or maybe even the African American community, who, for a little of their pride movement, were celebrating African cultures, but certainly have thought about things like reparations. Returning peoples is not a very common narrative, to my knowledge. You thinking of an example, Tamara?
Seeing Russia today saying Ukraine, they want their empire back.
Yeah.
They're moving in.
Yeah. Tamara gave the example of Russia trying to retake the Kurds. Yeah. So interestingly, I probably will forget to reference it later, so I'll say it now. The book, The Jew in the Lotus, was a narrative by a journalist who was invited to go with a delegation of rabbis by invitation of the Dalai Lama. They went to Dharamsala to hold an audience with him. And over the course of, I think, about a week, the Dalai Lama met with this delegation of about 10 rabbis or so, 12 rabbis across denominations, to ask a really interesting question, which is, how does a people in exile, potentially in extended exile, maintain its national identity without being absorbed and fading away? And as Tibetan Buddhists in exile, he's living that reality. And who better to ask that question than the Jews, who've done exactly that? And the short answer, their response to him, condensed, you don't have to read the book now, was Passover, the Seder. The sitting around the table and telling our story every single year to every generation as a narrative, as a mantra that can be spit out fairly quickly and accurately. So telling our story really is the bottom line. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of sources that get us started. So I tried to print this out, and for whatever reason, my computer is not playing nicely with the printer. So you all have it in your email. Next week, I'll make sure that somebody else tries to print it for me, and then I'll have you what you need. But this is what was sent out anyway. So people at home are able to look at this, and you will as well see the exact same thing when you get home. I brought you a couple of texts to demonstrate a couple of concepts for us to hold on to. The first one is that source of religious Zionism. So this is from Genesis. And it says, Adonai appeared to, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Where am I? There we go. Adonai appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he, meaning Abram, built an altar there to Adonai, who had appeared to him. And so this is the first reference, but one of countless examples where in the Torah, again, we say that the Torah is God speaking to humanity. Repeatedly, God says, I gave this land to your ancestors as an eternal inheritance. So this is the source of religious Zionism. I'm going to now show us how this land, which at the time was called Canaan, the Shaliach who just went home, Yoav, he was flabbergasted that we call this place New Canaan. He's like, it has two A's even in the English. And I had to be corrected when I first got here because I called it New Canaan. And someone said, oh, no, it's not. No, let's not do that. The biblical land of Canaan, when Abram was sent there in last week's Torah portion, 2 weeks ago, he got there, and of course it was not wide open with a sign saying welcome. There were already lots of people there. And it became a piece of the narrative, how Abraham and his son Isaac and his son Jacob and his sons, the tribes of Israel, how they interacted with sometimes peacefully, most often tolerating each other, and very often at war with each other. And so I just thought I'd bring a quick text here from a little later in Genesis, where it says, then Abraham bowed low before, oh no, sorry, I'm jumping to number 3. I'm going to jump to number 3, and I'll go back to number 2, I promise. Where's my cursor? There it is. So in Exodus, I brought you a text that says, I will set your borders from the Sea of Reeds. Now, hard to know where that is, but that's what the Israelites crossed as soon as they left Egypt, right at the border of Egypt. So it's probably somewhere over by the Suez Canal. All of the Sinai Peninsula then, which of course we don't relate to today, from the Sea of Reeds to the Sea of Philistia. Is that the Kinneret maybe? Or is it the Mediterranean? And from the wilderness of the Euphrates, from the wilderness to the Euphrates, Euphrates is all the way up in Syria. And the wilderness is what they wandered through down in Sinai. So this description of the borders is not very helpful. And it's certainly not what we recognize today as the land of Israel. He says, I'll deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hands, and you will drive them out before you. So what we're being told here is, have faith. When you undertake a war, I'm going to be there because I want you to have this land. I'm speaking as God. I want you to have this land. So the outcome of the war is already predetermined. You may have to fight hard, but don't worry, I'm with you. That's why when the Israelites are about 30 days, no, more than that, within the first year out of Egypt, and they walk straight across the Sinai. They get close to the borders of Israel, and Moses sends spies. And when the spies come back and say, my God, the people of that land are huge. There's no way, we must look like grasshoppers in their eyes. That was a demonstration that this people was not ready yet to trust God. So God decided at that point that we needed to wander the desert for 39 more years so that every mature adult who came out of Egypt would die in the desert, because having been slaves for 400 years, they weren't capable of living as free people. So only their children, who'd never known what slavery felt like, not as, at least as mature people, only they would be ready to move into the land. So once that generation died out, the last of which was Moses. You know, the very end of Deuteronomy is the story of Moses dying. And when he dies, then the people move on under Joshua's leadership.
Did you say slaves for 400 years? Thousands?
No, there's two varying accounts in the Torah. They were either slaves there for 230 or 400.
So where am I getting
Do you want me to answer that? Lee's wondering, he thought that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt for 5,000 years, and he wonders, where am I getting that, if not from the Torah? And I'm going to say he pulled it out of his butt, but, you know, I don't know. I'm not sure where you got 5,000 years. Yeah, I don't know. Keep thinking about it, let me know. Sheldon?
Number 40 years.
Yeah.
Is not a mathematical concept, I take it. It's a substitute for generation?
Yeah.
Because we use
Yeah.
40 a lot of times.
Yeah, it's a typological number. Yeah, the numbers in the Torah are not meant to be taken literally, generally. And so, yes, 40 is one of those. Whether it was exactly 40 years or not is sort of not the point. You're right, it was a generation. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bounce back up one because this is actually a really important concept that begins to see itself relived in the 1800s. And it's when Sarah dies in this week's Torah portion, this one I know, and they're on the road, and Abraham needs a place to bury his wife. And he knows that there's a guy named Ephron who has a cave on his property that's appropriate for burial. And he decides, I want to buy the cave. And there was a whole dance of negotiations that are really quite interesting in the Torah, where in front of the community, Abraham says to Ephron, I want to buy your cave. And he says, please, take it for free. And Abraham says, no, I refuse that. I must pay for it. And Ephron says, no, seriously, it's a gift from me to you. And Abraham says, I insist that I pay for it. And Ephron says, what's 400 shekels between friends? Really, it's all yours. And Abraham pays him 400 shekels. And the concept here is important because it is, as far as I know, kind of the only example where Abraham paid legally and took possession of the land of Israel in a demonstrable way that becomes a model for when the Jews move in the first wave of Zionism in the 1880s. They were insistent on buying the land at fair market value in most cases, as far as I know. They were not doing what text number 3 says. They were not driving out the Arabs early on. They purchased the land, they had deeds to the land, and they were willing to pay well. And so the Palestinians, the Arabs who were living there, whether they were Palestinians or not, I don't know, they thought, this is great. They sold us swampland up in the Galilee. Who wanted that? And they sold us desert that was good for nothing in the south, and we were happy to buy it. And so they thought we were fools for purchasing the land. But this is the model for coming into ownership in a visible and public legal way. Good. So did I give you? Yeah, so one more text from the Torah, I think that's all I brought us, is from the book of Joshua. So I mentioned that Israel, the people of Israel, get to the border. They're so close that Moses can go up on the top of Mount Nebo, and he can look over the Jordan River into the promised land. And he asks God one more time, please. And God says, nope. And Moses breathes his last up there. And then Joshua, who's already had prophecy transferred to him, visible in front of everybody, he becomes the new leader of the Israelite people. And under his leadership, they cross the Jordan River. Now, they're in the promised land. And here's just one of a whole book of examples. So I'm just going to read this real quickly. Joshua, with all his combat troops, came upon them suddenly at the waters of Merom and pounced upon them. God delivered them into the hands of Israel, and they defeated them and pursued them all the way to Great Sidon and Meraphot Maim, and all the way up the valley of Mitzpeh on the east. They crushed them, letting none escape. The Israelites kept all the spoil and cattle of the rest of those cities as booty, but they cut down their populations with the sword until they exterminated them. They did not spare a soul. Joshua conquered the whole of this region, the hill country of Judah, and the Negeb, or what today we would call the Negev Desert, the Negev, the whole land of Goshen, the Shvelah, which today still is sometimes referred to, it's the plains, the coastal plains that include Tel Aviv and Ramat Aviv and all the way kind of from Jerusalem on down out towards the sea. That's the Shvelah. Where was I? The Arava. That's again the desert area north of the Negev, over by Arad in that area, and the hill country and coastal plain of Israel. Thus, Joshua conquered the whole country, just as God had promised Moses, and Joshua assigned it to Israel to share according to their tribal divisions, and the land had rest from war. So, when we're reading the Torah on Saturday morning as part of the Bible study group, the format we use is more or less to just start where we left off the previous week, to read a chapter and to talk about it. And I can't tell you how often, Marty is here with us online, he can tell you, how often we read a chapter and we think, oh my God, that's in our Bible? Like, this is clearly genocide. Like, we exterminated these peoples. And that's a really hard thing for us to accept as our canon of doctrinal literature. And so I guess I just put it here for us to have the whole picture. It is a historically bloody part of the world, historically violent, and land is taken and claimed. That's been the narrative there for a very, very long time. All right. I'm going to show you 3 more texts, I think. And the reason I'm bringing these 3 is because I want to demonstrate that throughout our diaspora, and, oh, look, Neely's calling. I'll talk to her later. A piece of who we are is essentially wrapped up in our relationship as an identity to that land. And we've had many expulsions, many dispersions. And in a moment, I'm going to run through the list very rapidly with you, very rapidly, I promise, because otherwise you'll go home crying. But it's not been an easy journey for us. But throughout that wandering of I'm going to say 2,500 years, because I'm starting in the year 586 BCE. That was the first expulsion by the Babylonians. And from that point on, we start having communities outside of Israel, and literature is being formed, mostly, in fact, outside of Israel. We came back to Israel in 516 BCE, but then we were dispersed again in the most significant way in the year 70. And again, we'll come back to these in just a moment. But I'm going to share with you some material that is really emblematic of our emotional relationship to the land through material that became a part of our routines. So if you open up the book of Psalms, Psalm 137 is going to probably sound a little familiar to many of you. This is written by some guy who's sitting there by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat and we wept as we thought of Zion. There on the poplars we hung our lyres, for our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cleave or stick to my palate if I cease to think about you. If I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour. So, first of all, are there a couple things here that kind of jogged your cultural memories?
Yes.
Yeah.
That last.
If I forget thee?
Forget you, O Jerusalem.
Yeah. How about the beginning, the opening? Bob Marley, anyone? By the rivers of Babylon. Where? Yeah, I guess a lot of people, I think of it as Marley, but you're right. It was covered over and over. Oh, yeah, okay, thanks, Glenn. You're absolutely right. And then the last piece is, I want to just kind of emphasize this thing where we remember Jerusalem even in our happiest hour. As an example, yeah, Michelle points out the stomping of the glass, but it's not just that. That's the easiest and most ready example. You're right. But there are tons of examples where we pause and bring a sense of a lack of fulfillment into our joyous moments and spaces. And the one that, for whatever reason, is popping to mind is you may someday or have already gone into the home of an observant Jew, especially in Israel. I haven't seen it very often, although I have in America. And somewhere, usually near the front door, there'll be a square of the wall, maybe 1 foot by 1 foot, that remains unfinished. In Israel, they build homes out of concrete. So it's, nice painting on the walls everywhere except for this one square of concrete. Or in America, it might be a square of drywall. And the idea being that the world is incomplete because we still don't have the Messiah and, the temple and Jerusalem. And so we have held on, even through our happiest moments, the idea that it's not done yet. We can't be fully happy because the prophecy hasn't been realized. Just checking at home once more to see if anyone's got hands up. All right. So the next one I'm going to give you is from the morning Amidah. Now, when we gather on Shabbat and we do the Amidah, the one where we start Adonai Sifadai. So on that Amidah, we do 7 blessings, 3 at the beginning, 3 at the end, and then 1 special one for Shabbat in the middle. 7 blessings. Number 7, another typological number. But the name of the Amidah is the Shmona Esrei, another name for the Amidah, Shmona Esrei, which means 18. And so on every other day of the week, we have the same 3 at the beginning, the same 3 at the end, but in the middle, we have a whole other set of blessings adding up to, anyone want to take a guess? No, thank you, Alan. 19. Go figure. I know, we Jews, seriously? I don't know. The liturgists believe that at one point in medieval times, one of the blessings was split into 2. So it was 18, but when we split it, it became 19, and we just kept calling it the 18. So in that 13 blessings in the middle, which we don't say on Shabbat because they ask for something, and we don't want to ask God to work on Shabbat. So the other 6 days of the week, there's these 19 blessings in the Amidah. You might only be familiar with the 7 from Shabbat because that's when our community most often prays. But one of those 13 is up here from the middle. And we ask in the Amidah, and return in mercy to Jerusalem, your city, and dwell therein as you have spoken, and rebuild it soon in our days as an everlasting structure. And may you speedily establish the throne of David therein. Blessed are you, Adonai, builder of Jerusalem. So 3 times a day, 6 days a week, in the mouth of every observant Jew, for the course of, I'm going to say roughly 1,500 years, these words have been spoken. That's a powerful touchstone. Every time you pray, you're saying, God, please take me back to Jerusalem. And at the end of the Seder, we say, Bashana haba'a b'Yerushalayim. And actually the full statement is b'Yerushalayim habnuya. Next year, in the rebuilt Jerusalem. Because we don't just want to go back to the city of bricks and mortar. We want to go back to the realized dream. When it mentions the throne of King David, the prophecy is that whoever the Messiah is will be born of the line of David. That's why it was so important that Jesus, for Christians, was in the line of David, because he fulfilled that prophecy. And so we're going to talk about false messiahs if we get to it today. False messiahs throughout our history have really given us a thorn in our side, but each one of them needed to demonstrate that they were born of the line of David. Otherwise, they can't be the ones fulfilling the prophecy. So here's an example of how we hold on to this language and ideology. And I'm going to give you just one more text, I think. Oh boy, where'd it go? Oh, it got broken down. Okay, so this is a poem by Yehuda Halevi. It's called Libi b'Mizrach. Lib or Leib, my heart, b'Mizrach, in the east. My heart is in the east. And this is written by a guy who's living in Spain. He died around the year 1141. And this has become a really, really famous poem. I think many Israeli school children can recite it from memory. It's a part of their cultural narrative, their heritage. And his language is this: my heart is in the east, and I in the uttermost west. How can I find savor in food? How shall it be sweet to me? How shall I render my vows and my bonds while yet Zion lieth beneath the fetter of Edom, and I lie in Arab chains? A light thing it would seem to me to leave all the good things of Spain, seeing how precious in mine eyes to behold the dust of the desolate sanctuary. Is that the end of Sfarad? Yeah. So he's saying it seems like it'd be an easy thing to just pick up and leave and go off to Jerusalem, and yet he feels like he's in chains there. So this became, again, a medieval expression of attachment. I'm showing you by intent only a few touch points or anchors through our literature, through history, to demonstrate that we've never lost that relationship to the land. And I forgot, I do actually have one more text here, which became the national anthem, Hatikva. And in case you've never spent much time looking at the English translation of Hatikva, what that national anthem articulates is, as long as the heart within the Jewish soul yearns, and towards the ends of the east, the Jewish eye gazes toward Zion. Our hope, I'm supposed to be up there, our hope is not yet lost. The hope of 2,000 years to be a free nation in our own land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. It's lovely, man. Isn't that great? I just want to sing. How are we doing? Okay, a lot of frontal presentation here, and we've only gotten started. So anybody want to pause and clarify anything or ask anything? Or Joan, what have you got?
As I listened, I'm thinking I have a better understanding of why the ultra-Orthodox Jews are so clinging to the belief that the Jews are entitled to their land.
So Joan said that she's beginning to understand why the religious Zionist approach of the ultra-Orthodox would demonstrate such a deep-seated connection to the land. I've shown you lots of examples that would have been a part of their formation, and part of the nature of the small c conservatism of Orthodoxy is to hold on and to change as little as possible. Orthodox means singular way. And so they're not looking to reform anything. And so that, you're right, that explains how medieval literature has maintained a very, very important place in their religious understanding of the world. Frankly, that's the only understanding they have of the world. Whereas we have a lot more nuanced or complex tapestry of pieces. Sheldon?
So it's where we get this, this Meshuggah thing about these Hasidim, who while the IDF was fighting for the existence of Israel, they actually went out into the field where the soldiers were fighting and told them they did not need to use their guns or anything. God would protect them and would give them Israel, and they didn't have to worry about defending them.
Yeah. The ultra-Orthodox are a constant complication of Israeli society. Sheldon was remembering that there have been cultural clashes, to say the least, between the Israeli Defense Force and the ultra-Orthodox community, who don't serve and are very explicit that the role that they play of preserving the tradition of learning Torah is more valuable, more protective of the people than picking up a gun and going out to fight. Okay, so anyone at home? Okay, every time I step off the camera, people at home, I'm looking at the computer screen to see if anyone's got their hand up. Okay, take a deep breath, folks, because now I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of what Saul Barron, an early 20th century, maybe late 19th century Jewish historian, what he called the lachrymose conception of Jewish history, because it appears as though our journey has just been from one tragedy to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And a long time from now, when we look back on this little chapter, who knows what happens tomorrow, but you know what, October 7th is plenty. The window of time between the Holocaust and October 7th, a mere 75 years or so, is going to look like nothing. So when you step way back and do what we're about to do, it looks like our people has suffered singularly throughout history, that's the only experience we've ever known. And it's important to hold on to the expulsions and the anti-Semitism and the demolition which has found us along the way. It's also important to remember that our very rich, joyful, love-based religion has been developed throughout history in between all of these dreadful dates on the calendar. So I'm going to do this for the following reason. I want you to get a sense of, just like Joan was saying, with the new compilation of material that's giving you a sense of where Israel exists in the hearts and the spirits of the Jewish tradition, similarly, this timeline that we're about to run through is a part of that narrative. Many have fond memories of childhood, a simpler time. It was lovely. If only we could go back to those easy, simple days when the world was much more understandable. That's kind of what our people does with Israel too, imagining that it was an idealized time. So here we go. First of all, what is this? Is this what I want to show you? Yeah. So I'm going to start at the 7th century BCE. And I think everyone knows this, but I'm just going to say it real quickly. Jews and academics don't use the expression AD and BC. AD is Anno Domini, which means that this is the year 2024, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. And since it's become universally used as the actual year, we now call it CE, the Common Era. So BCE is just before the Common Era. So working backwards, 700 years before the Common Era, the rise, oh no, that's of the Common Era. What am I doing here? Is this migrations, expansions? That's funny. There's a whole bunch of stuff that got left off of my list somehow. I'm gonna, that's weird. Yeah, is it up? Is it up above? Huh, where's all my material? Yeah, something really unusually weird happened for me, folks. I'm not sure, I'm having a kind of a technology issue. All right, well, I'm gonna back up a little bit because it was important for you also to know that in antiquity, there was some important movement as well. I mentioned a few of them. So the Assyrians, they moved into this land of Canaan in about the 8th century BCE. And that was kind of the first time that a mega empire found its way to that land. But that land is on a very narrow land bridge of livable space that connects the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia to the megalopolis of Egypt and the continent of Africa. So any army that wants to expand its territory is going to have to go across that little land bridge. And so the migrations of these massive empires really affected us because we were just caught in their way. So the Assyrians were the first one in about the 8th century BCE. And then I mentioned the Babylonians, and there are a couple of good years. You'll always impress people. This is one of the good years to remember. In 586 BCE, that was the destruction of the first temple. That was the year that the Babylonians finally got tired of us as Nudnikim and wiped us out, carried us away to Babylon, as we just heard from the psalmist, and left behind all of the lowest levels of society, took away the aristocrats and the educated and the royalty, and left the land decimated. We were able to come back about 80 years later in the same century and rebuild the first temple, but it did a number on us. When we left and we spent 80 years in Babylon, which was, the seat of culture in the world at that time, and then Cyrus said, okay, you guys can go back. A lot of us said, why would we want to go back? That land is a wasteland. There's nothing there. It's ruins. And so a huge portion of the highly educated and wealthy Jewish community stayed in Babylon. That's important. So hold on to that. There was lots of internal fighting over the next 5 or so centuries, but when we get to the year 70, that first several decades of the Common Era, during and just after the kind of what you think of as the lifetime of Jesus, there was a huge amount of internal strife at the same time that there was external pressure from the Romans. The Roman Empire had expanded down over our little strip of land and had allowed us as a vassal state to kind of sort of self-govern, but really as more of a puppet government. And so when we were no longer willing to, Shell, can I get you a glass of water or something? You okay?
No, I just have this itch.
Okay.
It's dry throat.
When the Romans got tired of us and our rabble rousing and our sectarianism, the result was the destruction of Jerusalem and the expulsion of the Israelites. Not across the entirety of the land, because they gave us a few cities up north, which is also important. A couple of cities became really crucial. One was the city of Yavne, and the other city was Tzipori. And in those two centers of academia, the rabbis began reestablishing the tradition of Jewish culture. The temple had been destroyed, but the academic pursuit of textual interpretations and whatnot, what you think of today as Judaism, that was what the rabbis carried on once they were allowed to leave Jerusalem before it was sacked. So the cultic worship under the leadership of the priests came to a sudden end in the year 70. And since then, there has been no temple-based Judaism. Now, when you hear me say that, you're thinking, wait a second, where am I sitting? But we need to differentiate between the temple that God has us build as the singular site for sacrifices, which for the most part was in Jerusalem, and then what emerged as a replacement, where sacrifices were not done, but still we gathered for the purposes of ritual connection to God. Those became synagogues and temples. So from that point of the year 70, when we are carried off to Rome and we're carried to the far reaches of the Roman Empire, it's not yet the Holy Roman Empire, it hasn't converted to Catholicism, but the Romans, they took us and our fairly high literacy rate and ability to trade, and they scattered us all over their empire. And I'm supposed to have here a link for, if I have it on another, no, that's not helping. Well, I don't seem to have the maps that I want available to me here. Give me a quick second to see. Huh. Oh, maybe this is it. Oh, I think I found it. Okay, so this is going to be one of many maps. None of them are very good, but this is the best I could find for our purposes. So what you've got here are a series of circles of population centers, and then arrows with dates on them that show when and how the Israelites moved from right here, this little strip that we're calling Palestine, on this map anyway, all the way across the Western world, okay? So starting here in the year 586, we see one line that shoots us all the way, I just saw it. Where am I? 586, it's funny, I lost it. Gone. Huh. Well, all right, I'll just leave it here. In 597, that's just a little before the first destruction, we're pushed all the way over here to Babylon. And then that's where a big piece of us stays. From there, we kind of spread out over here to the land of Media, which you sometimes hear about from the book of Esther. This is modern day Persia. And then all the way down, well, I guess this is Persia. And then from here, there's a couple of lines that shoot off the map to the east. And that's where small sections of our people continued traveling. And this is sort of interesting, made it to India, where there is still just the tiniest remnant of a Jewish community in the town of Cochin. And what's really cool about this is it happened back in the years of pre-Roman destruction and pre-Talmud. And so the Jews in India didn't know anything about the Talmud. They're biblical Jews, which is super interesting. Same thing here. This group coming here from Alexandria all the way down the coast of Africa to modern-day Ethiopia became known as the Falasha. And the years here you can see is the 1st century BCE. And they didn't know anything about the Talmud. So when we found them, maybe they were one of the lost tribes, who knows, they claim to be. They didn't know anything about the rabbinic forms of Judaism, what we consider to be basic Judaism. They'd never come across before because...
Not only is there India, but there are also Jews from China.
Yeah. For our purposes, the majority of the migration began shooting across North Africa and up into Turkey and the Caucasus Mountains, across here a little bit to Italy, but eventually, and I have another map I'll show you, eventually all the way over here to the Iberian Peninsula. And that's important because we spent about 500 years of incredible blessing as resident aliens in the Arabic culture of Spain and Portugal. And it's known as the Golden Age of Spain, where we were subjugated, Christians were as well, but the Islamic empire of the Umayyads, they held a special place within their culture for other monotheists. The technical term was dhimmi. We were part of the dhimmi. We had extra taxation, we had limitations on what where we could work and where we could live, but otherwise, we were generally pretty free to be. And there was a rich sharing of culture, art, music, math, liturgy, philosophy. And so a really, really important time in the formation of modern Jewry happened in that window of time. That time came to a very solid and immediate end. Do you know the year? 1492, that's right. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and Spain ejected the Jews too. So from there, a couple of important things happen. Is it on my other map? Let me see if this is the other one I wanted to show you. Yeah, this isn't going to do exactly what I wanted, I think, but let's see. Did that go? Ah, there we go. Oh, that's too small. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger. Sort of. All right, that's not great. But here over on this side, we've got Spain and Portugal. 1492, it shows here we've got an arrow going that way to the New World. There's a little evidence that Jews were on the boats with Columbus, but mostly in those couple of years, this is the Inquisition. They're facing other directions. So there was a wave of Jews that went up north into Europe, Western Europe. There was a big group that came back down around North Africa or shot out across the Mediterranean and landed in Italy. There was a lot of the community who went to modern-day Turkey, Istanbul, Constantinople, some back down here to Alexandria, which has always been a rich center of Jewish life, and some back to Jerusalem, although not a lot. But then, sometime later, Poland invites the Jews back, which is an important element. They gave us this land, which eventually Russia designated the Pale of Settlement, and it's where most of our families came from as Ashkenazi communities. Yeah, Everett?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it, at that point, the flow north was identified as Ashkenazi and the flow south as Sephardic, or
It's a great question. So Everett's wondering if the people who went north became Ashkenazim and the people who went south became Sephardim. It's not quite that clean, but it's not a bad way to say it. For the most part, the people who became what we would call Ashkenazim had migrated up through here. They were not a part of the expulsion from Spain. And the people who came out of Spain didn't just stay in Morocco and Egypt. They continued on over to Syria and down to Yemen. We had a long time of life in Yemen. And so, where else? I'll leave it at that. So those are the ones that we think of as Sephardim. The Ashkenazim, I think, mostly, and this is hard to trace. That's why these maps are so bad, because the history is actually kind of difficult to put together. But the Jews who kind of went north during went north up this way into the eastern side of Europe and the western side of Europe, those are the ones who became Ashkenazim.
now there's a group called Mizrahi?
Yeah, that just means eastern. So the ones who went down to Yemen, or the ones who went to Syria, those are Mizrahi Jews. Yeah.
If I may I interject just one quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was the 1550s, a little bit later, that the Jews were expelled from Portugal as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a small group that actually went to New York.
Yeah. The Spanish-Portuguese synagogue is there, and also outside of Newport, Rhode Island, there's a Portuguese synagogue. I have that year as 1496. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but yeah. Good. Okay, I'm seeing eyes glaze over a little bit, which is about right. Yeah, that's probably what you should be feeling at this moment. So I think I'm just about going to stop here. I thought we might talk a bit about false messiahs, but I'm not sure, other than fomenting Zionistic fervor, because it was a part and parcel of messianic fervor. The reason I thought I'd mention false messiahs, and there were like 4 major ones. Do you know their names? I'll be very impressed. Anyone have any of them? All right, so the first one is Jesus. 5, excuse me. Then there was Bar Kokhba. And then there was Jacob Frank. And then there was Shabtai Tzvi. Oh, there's 5. And the most recent? Yeah, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, yeah. Who some say died in 1994. But they have no faith, those people. Anyway, each time one of these false messiahs, and when I say false messiah, that's a theological category, because in our prophecy, there's a very clear articulation of what's gonna happen when Messiah comes. So if these guys came and died and nothing changed, we say, I guess we're still waiting. Christians, when they decided that Jesus was the Messiah, Son of God, they added elements of the prophecy that say, and now we're waiting for the second coming. Judaism doesn't read in our prophecy anywhere about a second coming. So each time one of these guys came and gathered fervor and following, they were often in the midst of difficult times, complicated times of social turmoil and desperation. The Jews who got excited about it often did radical things because they believed that it was imminent, the realization of the end of days. And so each time one of those guys came, the conversation around Israel resurfaced as a viable, realistic consideration. There were, especially through Shabtai Tzvi and Jacob Frank, there were people who sold all their belongings because they believed that it was, time for them to head off to the promised land. And yeah, that didn't work out. Who's got other questions?
Just one quick one.
Sure, Everett.
Maimonides, was his work performed before the expulsion?
Yeah. Maimonides died in 1121. Give me a quick second. Do I have him here? Yeah, something like that. I did not cover most of the timeline I expected to. My intent was to take us through some of the really dark times of the pogroms through Eastern Europe, the Pale of Settlement, which of course were related to and part of our narrative with the Holocaust. But before the Holocaust, due in large part to the pogroms, there were waves, 2 major waves of Jews who said, enough, we're done. We're headed off to the promised land. Zionism became a thing in the 1880s. That was the first wave of Aliyah. And Jews would just head off to the promised land, the Holy Land. I mean, I think traveling to Israel today is a long flight. But back then I can hardly imagine what it meant to pack it all up and decide you're all in. And then through the early part of the 20th century, you're probably a little more familiar with those historical touch points. And I will discuss with you next week the narrative, which is a part of, and I'm going to say this intentionally, it's a part of the Zionist myth that Israel became the outgrowth, the repayment for, or the compensation maybe, for the Holocaust. Both compensation on the part of the world and compensation by God. That once we'd gone through the fires of the Shoah, that the natural outgrowth was the land of Israel, the state of Israel. And if you spend a little time in Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, that is very explicit in the way that the museum is created. They show the history leading up to the darkest days of the Holocaust, and then the museum transitions into the beginning of the modern state of Israel. It's so clear that that is the narrative. And that, we'll talk about that a little bit more next week. 2 weeks. You're right. Thank you, Tamara. What's going on next week? Thanksgiving, yeah.
Thanks for your great class.
Sheldon. He's just a teacher's pet. Yeah, you'll get an A, don't worry. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your patience on the things. Yeah. And thank you, everyone at home, too. I hope you'll come back again next time. Here, I'm going to change the cameras so I can actually wave to you. Where am I? Hey, guys. Good night, everybody. That's okay.